I should have known this day was going to break something inside me. You don't spend a full year holding up a family like scaffolding around a crumbling building without learning to feel the cracks. I had been watching my own reflection crack in bathroom mirrors and parking lot windows, a tired woman staring back, someone who had given too much and received too little in return. The first check I wrote was small. Just a little help with the property taxes when Mom said the notice came with red letters on it. Then came the call about my sister's car, the engine, the tires, the overdue loan payment. One by one, they piled on. A month later, it was the tuition for her daughter, my niece, to stay in the same fancy private school where they'd insisted she deserved to be. No one said thank you. No one even asked if it was okay. They just let me step in, as if I were the designated cleanup crew for every poor decision they had made. $32,457. That's the number I stopped at. I remember because I wrote it down on a napkin at the DMV, waiting to renew the registration on my own 10-year-old SUV, which needed 2 new tires I couldn't yet afford. But Christmas was supposed to be different. I told myself that this would be the moment that justified it all. I imagined the warm glow of string lights through frosted windows, the fireplace crackling with laughter around it, my 2 kids running up the porch steps ahead of me, mittens falling off, their breath making little ghosts in the air. I had even bought matching pajamas, corny, yes, but I wanted something cheesy and sweet, something that would stitch us all together for a moment in time. I arrived with my arms full of carefully wrapped presents, gifts I had spent nights choosing and days working overtime to afford. The wrapping was deliberate. Blue and silver for Dad, red plaid for Mom, gold paper for my sister because she always insisted Christmas was her holiday. For my niece, a mountain of boxes with glitter and bows, each one a secret indulgence. And for my boys, their hands in mine, coats zipped all the way to their chins, I carried hope. The house looked like something out of a holiday commercial. Warm light spilled through the windows. I could hear Nat King Cole singing about chestnuts roasting. I saw shadows moving in the living room. Laughter. It was all happening. So I stepped up to the door, balancing the weight of gifts on my hip, nudged my son to ring the bell, and waited for the flood of greetings, the joyful squeals, the rush of welcome. The door opened slowly. It was my mother. She was wearing a cream-colored sweater with a pearl pin. Her makeup was done just enough to say she was expecting someone. But not me. Not us. She looked at me like I had shown up with a dead squirrel in my hands. "Oh," she said, hesitating. Then she stepped halfway out onto the porch and closed the door behind her, the cold air biting between us. My younger son tugged on my sleeve, whispering that he needed the bathroom. I tried to smile, tried to wait for her to step aside and welcome us in. But then she spoke. "We're doing something more refined this year," she said. Her voice was low, her mouth tight. "Your sister deserves a quieter, more elegant Christmas. I hope you understand." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and shut the door. Just like that. I didn't move at first. The sound of the door closing echoed in my head longer than it should have. It didn't slam. It clicked. A small, polite, final click. Like punctuation at the end of a sentence I didn't get to write. I stood there, still holding the boxes, my arms starting to ache. My older son looked at me, confused. He was 12, old enough to know something had gone wrong, but too young to know exactly what. I lowered the presents to the porch, one by one, without a word. My heart was hammering in my chest, but outwardly I was still. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the car keys, and turned around. The kids followed. We walked back down the steps, past the glowing wreath, past the welcome mat that now felt like a lie, and climbed into the car. They didn't ask me questions. I think they could tell that silence was the only thing holding me together. I drove aimlessly for a while, past other houses strung with lights, past windows where other families were gathered in warmth and joy. I passed the corner gas station, the shuttered bakery, The playground where my boys used to shout across monkey bars and hop across patches of mulch, pretending it was lava. Eventually, I pulled into a 24-hour diner, the kind with red booths and syrup-sticky menus. We sat at a table near the back, under a wreath made of tinsel and chipped ornaments. I ordered pancakes for the boys, coffee for myself, and stared at the vinyl booth across from me like it held answers. Something in me was done. Not broken, done. There's a difference. Breaking implies fragility, something cracked that might mend with time or glue or forgiveness. Being done is quieter. Still, it's not a decision you shout. It's one you feel settle in your bones like winter. They had shut the door on me. But more than that, they had shut the door on my children. And that more than any unpaid debt or withheld thank you was the final straw. I didn't speak to them for 3 days. Not a word. Not even when my sister sent a hope all is well text that dripped with artificial sweetness. Not even when my father emailed me a photo of the Christmas roast with the caption, "We missed you." Instead, I made a list. Names, amounts, dates. Every single dollar I had spent that year to hold up the people who had just slammed the door in my face. The mortgage relief for my parents. The 3 car payments for my sister. The tuition check for her daughter, who had smiled at me with gratitude and then joined her mother inside that house with the elegant Christmas. I added interest. I didn't plan to charge it, but it felt good to write it down. Then I opened a second page. This one wasn't numbers. It was a plan. I won't tell you everything here. Not yet. But I will say this. People like my family, people who live in a house of cards built from favors and appearances and borrowed wealth, they never expect the quiet ones to rise. They never expect the single mother to turn around, to use what she knows, to remember. But I remember everything, and next Christmas, they'll remember me too. Not because I showed up with presents, not because I bought their forgiveness, but because I took back everything they thought they were entitled to. And I left them nothing but their own echoing silence. The house smelled like syrup and deflection. The morning after the Christmas that wasn't mine, I stood in the kitchen, pouring batter into the hot skillet, flipping pancakes with a practiced hand that no longer shook. I smiled for my children because I have always believed that strength in front of them is a kind of armor. They don't need to know the exact nature of every blow I take, only that I never let it knock me down for long. But while my body stirred the batter and made cheerful shapes on the griddle, hearts, stars, even a lopsided snowman, my mind was elsewhere, pulling apart the fabric of the last 12 months. My youngest, 7 years old and impossibly tender, swung his feet under the kitchen stool, asking if we could maybe go see Christmas lights later. I told him yes, because I could give him that. I could still create magic even in the aftermath of betrayal. My oldest, 12 and already growing into the kind of quiet boy who sees more than he says, watched me for a moment too long. I saw it in his eyes, the flicker of knowing, of caution. He wasn't fooled by the pancakes or the humming or the way I smiled a little too tightly when I told them there had been a mix-up last night. There had been no mix-up. There had been a door, and it had closed on all of us. After breakfast, while they played in the living room, I stepped into my home office. It wasn't really an office, more of a converted corner of the dining area with a folding desk, an old monitor, and a potted plant I kept forgetting to water. But that desk had carried me through years of late-night budgeting, tax filings, freelance project bids, and Zoom calls where I wore lipstick over exhaustion. That desk had seen the truth long before I had been willing to say it aloud. I opened my laptop. It hummed to life like an old ally waking from sleep. I clicked into my folder system, past the photos and school documents and work invoices, into a directory labeled simply Household. There it was. The spreadsheet. 2023. Family Support Ledger. I hadn't opened it in weeks. Not because I had forgotten, but because I had grown too tired to keep counting. But now I needed to count. Not to make sense of what happened, but to remember exactly what I had paid to be erased. Line by line, I scrolled through it. $1,264.98. March, emergency car repairs for Jennifer, sister. Brakes gave out. I have a job interview Monday. Please, I'll pay you back in a month. She never did. $6,400. May, tuition installment for Maddie niece. She's doing so well at St. Verina's. We don't want to pull her out mid-semester. They never offered to split it. $2,100. June, mortgage deferment coverage for mom and dad. Dad had that scare with his blood pressure, and mom hasn't been booking clients. The bank is threatening foreclosure. No thank you card. Just a text saying, got it. For $1,850. August, back to school expenses. Uniforms. Books. A new laptop for Maddie. Sports fees. She's applying to colleges next year. It has to look good. My own boys wore hand-me-downs and got library cards instead of iPads. $7,298. October. Property tax shortfall. Again. We're tapped out after that plumbing disaster. You know how it is with old houses. Yes. I know exactly how it is with old houses. You maintain them with the blood of whoever is most willing to bleed quietly. The numbers kept adding up. Every figure was a memory. Every note in the margin was a moment I chose not to fight, not to beg for acknowledgement. And in that choosing, I had let them forget. That was my mistake. I had made it too easy for them to think of me as reliable instead of valuable. I closed the spreadsheet, my jaw clenched, but not in rage. This was not rage. This was recognition. Something inside me was reorganizing itself, not burning down, but solidifying, reforging. There's a difference between breaking and turning to steel. And I knew, in that moment, I had become something colder than forgiveness and more precise than anger. I opened a second file, one I hadn't touched in almost 2 years. Contingency plan, family trust access. Because what they forgot, what they had let themselves forget with all their demands and dismissals, was that I had been the only one in the family who ever truly understood the paperwork. They called me the organized one, as if it were a backhanded compliment. They joked that I always had a spreadsheet for everything, as if foresight were a flaw. They leaned on it, always. But they never read it. 2 years ago, after Dad's second mild stroke and Mom's increasing forgetfulness about due dates and bank appointments, I stepped in. Quietly. Legally. Efficiently. I didn't make it about power. I made it about survival. They were disorganized, overwhelmed, and resistant to help. So I gave it to them in the form they could tolerate, disguised as convenience. I'll just put everything on autopay for you, I'd said, smiling like a nurse offering medication. Let me clean up the paperwork so the CPA doesn't hassle you again. You don't have to worry about the trust statements. I'll file them every quarter. It's just numbers. But it was never just numbers. Not to me. And when I reviewed the trust, an old family arrangement set up by my grandfather containing what little generational wealth we had left, it had been in shambles. Unfiled tax returns. Incomplete disbursement records. Missed deadlines. Risk of dissolution if someone didn't intervene. So I intervened. I became the designated successor trustee. They signed the forms because they didn't understand them. They signed them because I smiled and made it sound like I was doing them a favor. I was. But the favor was for me. I didn't plan to use it. Not then. Not until I had to. And now I had to. I opened the legal packet on my desktop, the scanned and notarized PDF copies, the log of asset transfers, the last known account statements. Roughly $280,000 sat in the trust, conservative investments, bonds, a small real estate parcel in Maine. It wasn't a fortune. But it was the one thing they had left that they thought still belonged to them. They had never asked about it. Not once in 2 years. Because they assumed I would protect it. Because they assumed I would never need to remember what they did. But I had remembered. I spent the next hour drafting a formal notice of reassignment. The language was dry, courteous, and devastating. I was not dissolving the trust. Not yet. That would make things too easy for them. Too clean. Instead, I was reallocating the asset management to a third-party fiduciary. A woman I knew well, smart, discreet, and utterly unimpressed by family drama. She had handled divorce settlements for 3 of my former clients and had once told me the most dangerous woman is the one who doesn't raise her voice. I emailed her. I CC'd no one. She replied within 20 minutes. I'm available Tuesday at 3 p.m. Let's ensure everything is structured for maximum control. Yours. It felt like breathing after drowning. I stood up from the desk and poured myself a cup of coffee, black and unflinching. Outside, the wind had picked up. The sky was a hard winter gray, the kind that makes you zip your coat and walk faster. My boys were still on the living room floor, constructing a Lego fortress that kept falling apart and being rebuilt. I watched them for a long time. I thought about how many times I had fallen apart and rebuilt myself. I thought about how I never let them see me crumble. But maybe I realized it was time for them to see me rise. Later that night, I received a group text from my sister. Hey, hope you're okay. We missed you so much at dinner. Maddie loved her gifts, BTW. She was smiling all night. Let's do brunch soon, just us girls. Red heart. I stared at the message for a full minute. And then I typed exactly one word. Noted. Then I archived the thread. I don't fight with people who aren't operating in truth. I let their own behavior be the evidence. The next day, I went back to work, my real job, the one that paid for everyone else's problems, the one I was now going to protect like a fortress. I rescheduled 2 client calls. I took a lunch break for the first time in a week. I printed the trust forms, walked to the UPS store, and sent them certified mail to my attorney. And then I bought myself a leather-bound planner. Not for budgeting. Not for lists, but for documenting. From now on, I was keeping a record, not just of dollars spent or insults survived, but of every move I made, every wall I built between myself and the people who once called it love. Some people think revenge is loud. A slamming door, a screaming match, a betrayal that burns down a house. But that's not how women like me do it. We don't scream. We refile the deed. We change the passwords. We audit the memory of what we gave and who took it without care. And then we reclaim what was always ours to begin with. The trust had always been a quiet thing. It existed in dusty envelopes and legal jargon, in quarterly statements no one read, in folders that got passed around during family dinners when I was 17 and still invisible in their eyes. It was one of those legacy arrangements our family clung to more out of vanity than need, a relic from my grandfather's shrewd business days, his way of preserving what little empire he'd managed to build from nothing but grit and precision. But unlike the others, I had always paid attention. Even as a teenager, I watched how money moved in our family. I noticed how gifts came with strings, how favors were handed out like candy to the loudest mouths, while the ones who carried the most weight, emotionally, financially, were always expected to smile and never ask for more. I saw the tension in my grandfather's eyes whenever my mother interrupted him mid-sentence. The way he'd politely excuse himself from conversations with my sister when she started spinning another dramatic tale that demanded sympathy but refused accountability. I noticed things. And more importantly, I remembered them. It was a full year before he passed that he pulled me aside. I was visiting him in his home, helping sort out some medical paperwork and insurance renewals, the kind of logistical support no one else in the family seemed to have the time or the patience for. He didn't make it grand. There was no ceremonial handoff, no confetti, no golden key. He simply handed me a folder, thick and worn at the edges, and said, "You're the only one who doesn't treat responsibility like punishment." I remember blinking, unsure what he meant. Then he continued, slowly, as if measuring each word for weight and intention. If something ever happens to me, and it will, this document makes you co-signatory on the family trust. You won't control it outright unless the others fail to meet their obligations. But you'll have access. And discretion. I nodded, numb with a cocktail of pride, shock, and disbelief. No one else knew. He didn't tell my mother, his own daughter. He didn't tell my sister or my uncle or anyone who might have assumed they'd inherit not just his wealth, but his authority. He told me, because he had watched me quietly navigate this family the same way he once had, by staying observant, patient, and methodical. He knew the cost of being the one who held the weight and never dropped it. He knew what it meant to invest in the person who never asked for applause. And when he passed later that year, I honored his silence. I didn't announce anything. I didn't flaunt the paperwork. I filed the forms, met with the estate attorney, and continued managing the administrative side of the trust like it was a job I was lucky to have, not a power play, but a duty. But now it was different. Now it was time. On the first quiet Saturday morning after Christmas, I made myself a cup of tea and opened the file. It was raining, the kind of soft gray drizzle that blankets the world in hush and reflection. My boys were still sleeping, their exhaustion from a week of holiday movies and hot chocolate catching up with them in the safest place I could give them. I sat at the dining table in my worn robe, hair tied back, laptop glowing in the dim light. I didn't hesitate. I didn't overthink. I opened the trust portal through the financial institution's secure login and clicked the tab marked Administrative Controls. Then I scrolled down and selected the following options. Freeze all disbursements, pending audit. Suspend recurring tuition payouts. Terminate monthly stipend to primary beneficiary, Martha H., my mother. Flag recent expenses exceeding $2,500 for manual review. The system prompted me for authentication. I entered the secure code, answered the security question only I would know, and pressed confirm. And just like that, the lifeline they had come to depend on without understanding it, appreciating it, or even acknowledging me as its source, was temporarily closed. Not destroyed, not stolen, just paused. Paused for inspection. Paused for accountability. Paused so that, for once, they'd feel the ripple of absence and ask themselves why. I didn't send an announcement. I didn't text anyone. I didn't call or post or drop hints. Instead, I returned to my tea. I folded a load of laundry. I vacuumed under the couch. I reorganized the pantry and cleaned out the kids' closet and started making plans for our spring break, somewhere quiet, maybe the mountains, maybe just a long drive with nowhere to be. I made space. And then I waited. The first email arrived Sunday afternoon. From my mother. Subject: urgent. Possible error with monthly transfer. Body: dear, I noticed my deposit didn't arrive this weekend. Could you check? It's probably just a banking error, but I need to pay the landscaper by Tuesday. Let me know. Mom. I stared at the message for a long time. Not a hi. Not a how are you. Not a single word about the fact that she had shut her door in my face on Christmas Eve. I didn't respond. I didn't even open it. I marked it as unread and archived it. By Monday morning, she had followed up with a text. Sweetheart, did you see my email? I'm sure it's just something small. Can you call me? I didn't. Instead, I took my boys to the science center, spent the day watching them build marble towers and learn about static electricity, and treated them to frozen yogurt on the way home. Their joy was real, untouched by obligation. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was giving my attention to something that gave back. That evening, the phone rang. It was my sister. I let it go to voicemail. The message was what I expected, but still, it sang with something delicious. She was panicking. Hey, can you call me when you get this? Something weird is going on with Maddie's tuition portal. It says the January payment is past due. I thought it was automatic. Did something happen? Also, Mom's freaking out, and I don't know if it's a glitch or... Yeah, just call me, okay? Please? I didn't. Instead, I waited until Christmas week ended, until the lights in their houses dimmed and the leftover wine turned stale in their fridges, until the world started to hum again with routine and consequence. And then I sent a single text. To both of them. Maybe you deserve better too. Merry Christmas. No follow-up. No explanation. I watched the read receipts blink on. And then I turned off my phone. The next week, I got a call from the financial advisor who had helped me set up the trust audit. Her voice was calm, respectful, even a little impressed. Well, she said, it seems they're waking up. I smiled, sipping my coffee as I listened to her list the flurry of emails, the requests to override the freeze, the attempts to argue their way into access. She told them, calmly and professionally, that the matter was under administrative review and would require formal documentation and beneficiary compliance to resume. She said they didn't like that answer. I told her I expected nothing less. They had forgotten what power looks like when it doesn't need to announce itself. They had forgotten what I carried in silence. They had mistaken reliability for passivity. And now? Now they were remembering. A week later, my sister texted again. Not frantic this time. This time it was smaller. More delicate. A single line. I didn't realize you felt that way. And I responded because she needed to hear it. You didn't care enough to ask. There are moments in life when silence is survival. But there are also moments when silence is strategy. This was both. Because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the sound of a balance sheet finally correcting itself. Sometimes, it's the sudden stop of entitlement crashing into a closed gate. And sometimes, it's a woman sipping tea in her kitchen, watching her children play, knowing she no longer owes anyone an explanation for standing up from the table they never let her sit at. The banner was the last thing I put up. It was large, too large, according to the contractor who had installed it, and it stretched across the entryway of the brand-new Family Resource Center that had opened its doors that very morning. A spring breeze fluttered the corners as I stepped back and looked at the words printed in a soft, deliberate serif font. For the invisible ones who held it all together. The words didn't shake when I read them aloud. I did not choke on them. I did not flinch. Because I had carried those words in my body for so long, they had fused to my bones. This was for the ones who made the meals no one thanked them for, who paid the bills in silence, who stayed up at night researching therapies and scholarships and low-cost solutions. This was for the women who answered the phone before it rang twice because someone, somewhere, needed rescuing. This was for the people who were only ever visible in crisis, only ever appreciated when they disappeared into usefulness. And finally, this space, this real, breathing, open space, belonged to them. I'd spent the past 3 months living like someone who had come back from the dead. Not because I had died, exactly. But because I had stopped living for other people's comfort, and that kind of resurrection changes everything. I had taken the portion of the trust that I was legally entitled to, my portion, the one they never thought I'd claim, and instead of hoarding it or flaunting it or using it to buy my way into some upper-middle-class fantasy, I reinvested it. But not in them. Not in appearances. Not in redemption. I reinvested it in the people who actually needed something. A building tucked in a neighborhood on the edge of town where mothers carried 2 jobs and no childcare. A space where single fathers could meet with family counselors who didn't charge $200 an hour. A pantry that didn't just hand out boxes of processed food, but asked people what they actually needed. A legal aid clinic open on Thursday nights, staffed by volunteers I'd once helped through divorce filings and housing disputes. And yes, it took work. And yes, it took grit. But I knew how to work. Because I had always worked. It was never the effort that broke me, it was the erasure. Now, on this bright April morning, the building stood complete. The siding was a soft, welcoming gray. The garden in front, still tender with spring blossoms, was planted by the hands of teenagers I paid above minimum wage because I didn't believe in asking people to build something they couldn't afford to benefit from. Inside, a bounce house filled one of the multipurpose rooms, donated by a local rental company whose owner I had once helped file bankruptcy papers for quietly, without judgment, when his cousin ghosted him and left him buried in contracts. I recognized many of the faces gathered around me. A few from school fundraisers, several from after-school pickup lines, many more from the quiet side of town where families survived on scraps of time and pieced-together support. My sons were in the middle of it all, running, laughing, their arms full of cotton candy and sidewalk chalk. My youngest had a streak of blue paint in his hair and didn't care. My oldest had found the tech corner, showing a younger boy how to use the donated iPads loaded with homework apps. This wasn't just a ribbon cutting. This was a life resetting. The media had come, of course. I hadn't invited them, but the story had leaked through a friend of a friend, and apparently, there was something compelling about a woman who used old money to build something new, not for status, but for people who had none. The camera flashes didn't bother me. The microphones didn't intimidate me. One reporter asked why I had done it. And I said this: I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because too many people give everything and receive nothing. I did it because sometimes the best way to stop being invisible is to create something that cannot be ignored. She wrote that down. Back at home, in a living room lined with silk throw pillows and polished oak floors, a television flickered to life. My mother sat with her hands clasped, the phone in her lap, buzzing every few seconds from group chats she no longer wanted to be part of. My sister leaned forward on the couch, holding a half-empty glass of rose like it might offer answers to the questions she hadn't even formed yet. The screen showed my face serene, composed, unflinching. Behind me, the banner stretched high. For the invisible ones who held it all together. There was no denying what this was. There was no misunderstanding. They weren't just watching a woman build something from the pieces they had discarded. They were watching the center of their family's strength walk away. The journalist's voice narrated the segment. She is the founder and director of the New Kindred Resource Collective, which offers free services to underserved families throughout the county. Funded through a family trust restructured after a quiet legal reassignment, she has poured nearly $500,000 into the project, without a single public statement until now. The screen cut to a clip of me smiling at a volunteer, a former teacher who'd lost her job last year and now ran the tutoring program I had personally budgeted into our grants. Then another clip played, my boys high-fiving each other under a string of paper lanterns, their joy uninhibited, their belonging absolute. No one asked where my mother was. No one mentioned my sister's name. Because in this story, they weren't part of it. Not anymore. I didn't build this center for revenge. But I won't lie and say it didn't satisfy something deep inside me, the part of me that remembered every slammed door, every ignored message, every time they said, "You always come through," without understanding what it cost. They hadn't just lost access. They had lost legacy. They had lost the one who made everything work, not because I withheld myself, but because they never learned how to hold me. They confused dependence with connection. They mistook availability for allegiance. And now they would live in the echo of that mistake. That night, as the cleanup crew rolled up extension cords and volunteers packed away the last of the donated snacks, I sat on the edge of the event stage and watched the sun slide down behind the new roofline. My boys were curled up on beanbags inside, watching an old animated movie with some of the other kids who didn't want to go home yet. One of the coordinators, an older woman with short gray hair and clear, kind eyes, sat beside me and placed a hand gently on my shoulder. "You did something rare here," she said softly. "You turned hurt into hope." I didn't answer right away. I just breathed in the peace. And then, without looking at her, I whispered, "They slammed the door on me like I was nothing." But I turned that closed door into an open future without them. Subscribe because sometimes the best revenge is building a life so full you forget they were ever missing from it.